Thank you very much. So what I thought I'd do today is give you a take on marketing so that if you're doing that sort of lean startup and you haven't got every single skill amongst the co-founders to the extent that would be ideal, then how do you do it yourself? And indeed, if you've got more cash in the bank and you are working with some marketing specialists, how do you brief them properly? How do you give them enough that they don't just give you a kind of copy-paste approach to things? So you need to know enough about marketing to be able to brief others. And really the skill in that is, you can pick up quite a lot of this out of textbooks. There's plenty of online courses, etc., etc. So it's not rocket science. But again, what I wanted to give you today was a sense of what the processes are for developing these sorts of strategies. And I also wanted to give you something that you can reuse. So this process is as relevant for a startup as it is for somebody seeking Series A or Series B. There are a heck of a lot more nuances as you get bigger, but again, the same structure, the same framework applies. So what we're going to look at today, in brief, is I want to ask you some questions about how you define success. Because if we don't know where we're heading for, and by the way, the co-founders might have different definitions of success, then at some point it's going to fall apart. So making sure we've got that solid is a good place to start. And again, sounds basic, but what business are you in? Particularly if you're driven by the product development. So if you're coming from that place of whether it's the creativity, whether it's the IT idea, in truth, you don't tend to stand in the customer's shoes as well or as keenly as you stand in the shoes of the person who's excited about that piece of development. So you've got to learn to stand in that other pair of shoes. That will lead me on to how you separate or how you translate the features into the benefits. And again, it's not rocket science, but there's a way of doing it that will be more effective than the kind of hit and hope or the copy-paste. I've heard a number of people mention this, and I'm no different. Which customers you care about. So that comment in the previous presentation about there's got to be enough of them, and you have to be able to reach them. So ways of determining that. And then going on to some, a real run through on what some of those appropriate forms of marketing communications are and how we can set some targets for this. And by the way, this usually runs as a one-day workshop and I'm sticking it into 45 minutes. So if you want the extended version, we'll have a separate conversation about how you actually do this stuff. Usually I spend a day doing this with people. So 3 questions about your business. By the way, we are going to come back to this one at the tail end because we're going to do this activity. Why? Why do you want to start a business? For heaven's sake, having a job is so much easier. You've really got to understand what drives you to do this and what your motivation for taking the long road, taking the tougher path is. Because in case you haven't clocked it already, entrepreneurs don't just work 9 to 5, it's a hell of a lot more work, and it is a stressful, time-consuming, can take a couple of decades to really get there process. So be clear on why you want it. By the way, your motivations will change as the business grows and develops. It's really worth coming back to that one every few years. And it's really worth it before you do the rounds of investment, because different people will want to get out at different stages. And other stuff happens. People have families, they have lives, they move. And so the sense of camaraderie that is usually there at the beginning can change over a 5 and 10 year period. Next question. What skills and resources do you need? This is the how lean can you be question. What have you got at the moment? What do you need? Where do you want to get to and what do you need to do it? So what's the bare minimum? Because everything else is a bonus. And again, in the early stages, there is that whole beg, borrow approach. How many favors can you pull? In those first 2 years, you can run on a lot of enthusiasm and goodwill. After the first couple of years, that will dissipate. You can't not pay people after the first couple of years. You can get away with asking a lot of favours early on because people want you to succeed. But that transition into the paid for version, as was being said in the previous one, you should at least cost it, even if you don't pay it. And then, what is success? So what were you motivated by? And how is that connected to what your definition of success is? Is your success based on money, size, impact, reach? You know, what are the things that really make it worth the effort for you? The way hang on, is that working? It's gone off. I think I have lost. I haven't touched it, honest. Maybe we'll swap it. It might need recharging. So, and as I say, we'll come back to this activity. The way I work with this one is to say, pick the words that resonate. I'm not asking you for full sentences in answer to these questions. Just pick the ones you care about. And if you can't see the words you like, add some more. And the reason I take this approach that's looking at the language is that what you really want is a unique voice. And yet what I tend to see, particularly in startups, is you see the same sort of text in everybody's pitch. It's got the same words in it, and it doesn't stand out, and it's not terribly credible, and it almost certainly is not authentic. So if you can't develop an appropriate language and voice, the chances of you standing out from the crowd, either with investors or with customers, is relatively slim. So it's worth spending the time on this stuff, and which is why we're going to come back to it towards the end. So my second piece is to say, well, what business are you really in? Now, again, if you're not used to describing the products and services, to be honest, when somebody asks you for an elevator pitch, you tend to be a bit all over the place. The way you counter this is, or the way I'd suggest you do it, is sit down with somebody that you don't know, that doesn't know the product, and just get them to listen to you. Be as verbose and long-winded as you like. I don't care. What I want the other person to be doing is I want them to be listening. I want them to be listening really hard for the bits that they think the key messages are. Because the one doing the listening can respond back to you by saying, this is what I hear. This is what resonates. Ideally do this with people who are potential customers, by the way, because what you think matters may well not be the same as what some of the customers or investors think is important. And you need the opportunity to just do this a bit in an environment that doesn't matter, because you'll learn from it. So when somebody, I've been working for myself for 15 years, those first couple of years, people would say, what do you do? And every time I gave them a different answer, because what I was really doing was trying out answers to see what people understood. And that's because I was coming from a marketing strategy background and talking to a bunch of creatives, none of whom had seen an Excel spreadsheet, let alone business strategy in their lives. So it takes a while to make that conversion. But again, we're coming back to the language. So the way in which you talk about it, working out those keywords and the style of it and testing them on people and seeing what reaction you get. You can move that on to, why does somebody need it? The challenge of being, particularly in a startup mode, but again in any form of product development, is you are so close to it that you think, of course, people need it. And what we're looking for here is a bit of distance. We're looking for a little bit of separation so that you can find out genuinely why people need this, not why you think they need it. And I know I'm being a bit kind of basic about this and a bit reductivist, and forgive me if this is what I would call an egg-sucking lesson, to quote the colloquial. But again, we can get lost in this stuff, which is why I'm coming back to the very basics of this. There was a question or a conversation in the last piece about, is it a new market or not? Life is much easier if it's not a new market. Because if it's a new market, not only do you need to communicate your product or service, but you actually need to explain the market to the customer as well. So you've got twice as many messages going on. So I'm not saying don't do new market things, but I am saying actually it's useful to find some competition, even if it's not in your geography, even if it's a different section of the market, because it's much easier than having a blank sheet of paper. So looking at it and saying, well, it's a bit like this and a bit like that, and it pulls this from here. And again, the other thing that'll help you build is analogies. Whether it's an investor or a customer, analogies help. Analogies and examples, and it's a bit like this, people will grasp it more quickly than if what you really push is just how different and unique it is. People are sort of scratching their heads going, have I really understood it yet? So you can do either, but understand the challenges of the two. Having worked out what your motivation is and your definition of success, I kind of want you to put it aside. And separately, I want to understand what's the goal of the business in terms of meeting the customer's needs. So one of the ways I describe this is to say that a business is a vehicle, and its job is to take that unhappy customer with their bag of cash. The bag of cash stays with the business and the customer walks out happy. Great customer experience, marvellous. But for you as a founder, it's a vehicle through which you achieve success. So those are two different stories. And the customer doesn't care about your definition of success. So we want some separation there. So summarising the goal in terms of how it meets the customer's needs, kind of for me is one of those things that sits above the desk in large letters, preferably neon, to make sure that we've got that reference point. The other sort of final point on here is to say you need that combination of the pragmatism of here's what I can do today with the ambition of here's what it could be. And you need both at the same time. Because from an investor's perspective, that size and scale is part of the attraction. But if the result of that is you say, well, if only I had a couple of $1 million, then I could, it'll get in the way of you doing stuff. So you want to be thinking big, but you also need to think about what you can do today. And one of the things I go looking for, or that rings alarm bells, is when people say to me, if only I had. Because that is a mechanism of procrastination. And that we want to get rid of. And it hampers you. You're putting barriers to your own progression if that's what's going around in your head. So, we know what your definition of success is. We know what you're motivated by. We have a clear understanding of the product and service. My next question is, do we understand how we convert those features into benefits? As the ones creating the product, you've got the features buzzing around in your head the whole time. That's fine. It's your job to get those features right. However, customer doesn't buy features, customer buys benefits. So how do we convert one into the other? My simplistic approach to this is to say, quite literally, list the features. What it's made from, what its size is, how it's made, what its constituent parts are. So if I'm thinking, cars with V8 engines and it's red and it's got 4 wheels, that's the description of what it is. That's very different to the benefit that a customer is buying. And even though I've been doing this 20 years, I would still say, list the features first and then convert each one. So you end up with 2 lists, one with clear conversion into the other. And if you can ask the question, or indeed if somebody else can ask the question, why does that benefit matter? And there's more detail, then you haven't yet gone far enough with that extrapolation into the benefits. There are some painfully cheesy examples here, but they make my point. So the classic that was taught to me in marketing was that when customers buy makeup, they buy hope. It makes me want to slip my wrists, but I understand where they're coming from. So, gentlemen, you may not buy makeup, but for the ladies in the room, that sense of what you're buying, you're not really buying the paste, right? You might, I mean, personally, I like the colour, but you know, you're not buying the thing, you're buying the end result. So actually, what you want to talk about is the end result, because then you've said to the customer, here, buy this sense of flamboyance in my case, I like to think. Here are the brands, you know, here's the way in which you achieve that sense of flamboyance. So again, just to, you know, keep the gentleman on edge, there's a fantastic British brand of makeup called Illamasqua, and the tagline for that brand is makeup for your alter ego. And for me, that's a beautiful description of here is something that is not for the 9-to-5 version. So don't buy your sort of quiet colours from us, buy your flamboyance here. And that's just a lovely description, and it separates, and I'm back to that language point. If you can develop that language through to the way it becomes the messages to the customers, it will stand out. Nobody else is going out and saying, make up for your alter ego. It is memorable, and that will help. The other example is that, you know, when we're buying a thing, it could be a Kindle, it could be a mobile, you know, one part of that is the ability to communicate. So we're not buying the old school version of a pencil and paper, we're buying what it does for us. And that's why you've got to make these conversions from what it is to what you do with it and how it's useful. Am I making sense? Is this relevant? Thank God for that. You can interject with questions, by the way, otherwise I'll just keep going. I have yet more daft examples. This is a classic British biscuit. It is known as a jammy dodger. It is 2 bits of biscuit with some jam in the middle. And the feature is the hole in the middle that points out there's jam inside. So the hole in the middle is in itself not a benefit, but it's demonstrating the elements of the product. The benefit is the temptation that it causes. It's the temptation that goes, oh, I do fancy jam today, and I'd prefer this to another classic English biscuit, the chocolate bourbon. So it's there to change your behaviour. And it's there to say, remember me, I'm this lovely thing called jam, come and get some. All right. All very well and good. We've got our features, our benefits, we know what bit of the market we're in. What customers do we care about? Because they are not all equal to our business. We want to identify a small number, because life is too complex for gazillions, of customer segments that are the best for our business. How are we going to do that? Again, I'm a fan of lists in this one. List the lot. Make as long a list as you like. List every single possible customer segment. In part, I say that because if your response, and I was teaching some fashion folks earlier in the week, if they say, my market is 18 to 35-year-old women, full stop. I look at that and I go, yeah, and? Can I have some more detail, please? Because you can't just market to all of them. And you can't just say my product is for everybody, because if you say it's for everybody, in reality, it's not specific enough for anyone. So we've got to get some more detail into this. And this is as true for people working in B2B as it is for those in B2C. So make a long list and then cluster them. Yes?
Recently I was at one of the training sessions where they made me go down to the person's name. Can you
I agree. I'm going to come to that. Yeah. Particularly when it's B2B, by the way. So, big long list, cluster it into segments. Then, we still need to cut that list down because which ones of those segments are the most relevant for you? You want segments that are sustainable. If people only ever buy once and they never come back and they don't spend very much in that one-time buy, are they really any use to you? Unless we're in the weddings market, in which case once is great, you want repeat buyers, because it costs you 5 times as much to acquire a new client as to maintain an existing one. So sustainability of your customer segment is really important. And naturally, you want the ones who will pay a price that enables you to make a profit. Otherwise, why are we a for-profit entity? If they won't pay a price that is making a profit, by the way, you're a charity. And a bunch of other things kick in at this point, which I'm not going to go into today. Your customer segments need to be accessible. If you are a tiny fashion designer and the only way that you can reach your customers is to take out a full-page advert in Vogue, they are not accessible in all likelihood, because you probably haven't got the money for a full-page ad. So you've got to have a set of reachable customer segments, which, by the way, may not necessarily be your perfect set, but they may be a step on the route to. And thirdly, you want to know when you've reached them. Now, the ultimate way of knowing it's not good, I'm right here. It's that stage in the day when all the microphones have run out of juice. I'm hoping that if you can't hear me at the back, you're going to wave. At the moment, you're smiling nicely and nodding, so I'm assuming you can hear me. Well, good. Thank you. So, of course, the best way to measure whether you've reached a customer is when they buy something. But if they don't buy, you kind of want to know it as well. We had this discussion yesterday with one of the other presenters. So measuring and evaluating the reactions that you're getting is really valuable. Now, the advantage of all the online stuff and all the digital is that there's so much tracking you can do in newsletters, on sites, etc. But that also, to me, is the build a database thing. Every time you have the opportunity to build your database of contacts, I would say go for it. And by the way, there are lots of opportunities to do that. They're not just about the buying. So thinking about that in your communications activities, I think is really important. Otherwise, you're just kind of scattering it to the winds and hoping that somebody responds. So I won't go into the detail. A lot of that was in the sort of sales tracking stuff that we had yesterday afternoon. Coming on to Sonia's point about definition. So let's get to some more detail here. In the who are the customers, I'm going to split this broadly into B2B versus B2C, and we've largely got some creative industries examples in here. All the possible, again, make another list. You'll see by this point I am a fan of lists. List all the possible people you could be targeting. Is it the buyers, the press, the awards? Who are you after? Because if we know who you need to reach, then we can target the marketing communications to suit that. And we can target which trade fairs you can go to, we can target what the key selling times in the year, etc., etc. And again, the other reason for doing this as a team is that you will all have slightly different opinions on this. And a salesperson may have a different view to a product development person because they want different things from the interaction. So again, if we can clarify that, stuff doesn't get lost in between, doesn't get lost in translation. In the B2C part, then again, we still want to, where possible, we want to use, in particular digital, to build that database of names and contact details. But we might also want some other routes to that are influencers in here. I'm going to take this point still further for the B2B stuff. So let us imagine that we want to meet a bunch of trade buyers. There are still many flavors of trade buyer. This happens to be a fashion example, but think of that broadly as garment and product design. You want to meet a buyer. Well, what kind of buyer? Do you want to meet people from Selfridges and Harrods, or do you want to meet independent boutiques? Do you want to meet global chains, or do you want to meet independent boutiques in the region? So make it as specific as possible, because if you can do that, just saying I want to meet Sony, not wildly helpful. Saying I want to meet the buying director for the region of who covers these products, you can then look them up. And I know you had a session on LinkedIn earlier. You can go looking for specific people because you want the names. You want individual people in the same way that we all know that if you send a letter to the chief exec, it gets nowhere near them. You've got to be able to put the name on it. And that's because you probably want to call them up and you probably want to invite them. If you're going to go to a trade fair, you don't want the random whoever turns up. You want to have scheduled a bunch of meetings with the key people you need to see, and therefore you've got to do all the prep ahead of time. So getting to individual names makes a heck of a difference here. It also means it's much easier to evaluate success of the aforementioned trade fair because you can see which ones you actually managed to meet or which ones you've got follow-up with. So again, the sort of evaluation of progress becomes easier and it's less random. I'm trying to eliminate the random. And I'd leave that point by saying you want a wish list. You want a wish list of what do I want from these people? Because if you can make a wish list of what you want from each of these individuals and all these types of people, then you can go asking for it. You know? And the more you can be specific about what you want from them, the easier it is to get that connect when you do see them. I think I've probably said most of that. So when I say write a wish list, you know, I want to meet some trade buyers at this trade fair. I want to meet this many journalists. I'm looking for to win this prize, and I'm therefore going to follow up with these folks. I see a lot of small businesses who at best have a kind of contact book and at best take in the business cards that they receive at trade events, and they just kind of sit there. And I'm like, come on, guys, do something with it. If somebody's given you a business card, write on the back of it exactly what you need to do as follow-up. Otherwise, that opportunity just floats away on the wind. So if you're collecting a bunch of business cards at an event, within a couple of days of it, for heaven's sake, contact them, because that's the window of opportunity. If you don't contact them for 6 months, they will have forgotten you. Even if you're not going to need them for 6 months, contacting them immediately and saying, thanks very much, when I'm ready, can I have a conversation about, will serve you much better than the sort of random reappearance. If we're talking about the details and how we get to beyond the 18 to 30 and female, then there's all sorts of stuff that you can be doing around segmentation. The most basic version of that is stuff around age and income and where they are and the depth of interest, whether a one-off buyer. There's lots of that you can do. And again, there's no point in my going into segmentation in depth today. You can teach yourself that online in all sorts of ways. But you can use it to drive a lot of your analytics. And what I would say here is do the segmentation first and use that to drive the analytics, not the other way around. Set some targets for it. Go looking for that in the analytics and then see what happens. If you get something completely different, yes, of course, there's something to be learnt from that. And no, it wasn't, your customer group is not quite where you thought they were. But go looking for something specific rather than seeing what happens and just letting it fall where it may. Really, this is just a list of saying what types of segmentation might you want to consider. For sure, look at geographic. Yes, look at demographic. Actually, move further and look at the psychographic segmentation. If you need to do this in real depth, get some expertise in. Again, detail, knowing their job title, knowing what they read, what trade press they read, how do they buy in, how do they outsource. All of this helps you work out how you're going to contact them. So, do look at the world from the customer's perspective. Do list the benefits to the customer and work out which of those are unique and develop the voice and the language that explains that. Because lots of us in the room are driven by the process of creation, there will be some features that you consider important that you haven't worked out why the customer needs them. If you ditch them, it will feel soulless. So if there are 1 or 2 key features that you absolutely have to have, it's got to be red. For, you know, I don't care why, but if you care that this thing is red, have it red. If it really matters to you to have feature X, keep it. Because that's one of the things that you have the choice in when you're running your business, is that you get to make it yours. You are not substitutable for any other founder. So some of this is choice. And the balance, of course, is the choice between what the customer cares about and what you care about, and does the business work. So, but at least I would say don't give them up. Do review who your sorts of customers are and who is not. Because you'll get lots, yes?
How do you counter the myopia and narcissism that a lot of entrepreneurs have a massive belief in their product or their service or their solution, and are driven massively by that?
So, do you mean specifically the product is for people like me, or I'm, as the founder, I have defined who my customer is, and I'm telling you you need it?
Yes.
The latter. I agree with you. You need to keep looking for that. And the way I would suggest you do that is partly, I would say, look for the outliers. You might have come up with who you think the customer's segments should be, and absolutely you should be testing that amongst the market. Really, I would say keep your view wide enough to see if there's something going on over here. You're focused on this bit, but if there's a massive spike from somewhere completely unexpected, don't disregard it. So keep looking for stuff that says, I haven't got it quite right yet. Have an opinion, have a definition of who you think the customer is, but test it. Is that fair? What would you add? I mean, there's no magic version of that except to maintain an open mind and to go looking for the things that you don't know about. If you decide that you know everything there is to know about it and you've defined who the customer is and that's it, you will absolutely narrow your market. So I'm thinking of an example that I sail, and one of the jobs I do on a race boat is I trim that great big sail out front kite, the one that you use downwind and is usually brightly coloured. The boat goes fastest when you're a little loose on it. If you strap that kite in too tight, you'll go reasonably fast, but you won't go the fastest the boat can manage. If you let it out a bit, and you're willing to take the risk of a bit of movement, and sometimes the kite will collapse and you'll have to reset it, on the whole, the boat will go faster. So you've got to loosen the reins of control just a little to allow the best to happen, and not hold it so tight that it can't go anywhere. And that's really what I mean by that sense of look for the stuff you don't know about. Otherwise, you'll only get the obvious. Which I think is really in my sort of patterns of success and rejection, because the patterns may not be quite what you think they will be. I've done that. Anyone not familiar with the adoption curve? Do I need to talk through it? I'll take that as a no, I don't need to. The point here is, we all like to be innovators, but it's only 2.5% of the market. Yes, they'll pay more of a price for it than anybody else, but that's probably not enough. So how far in this direction do you need to go? Is my main question on that. How am I doing for time?
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Yep.
Marvellous. At this point, I'm going to go old school. These are some of my favourite pieces of marketing communication. They're nothing more than that. Again, no rocket science involved. This bunch are a bunch of artists, and they were marketing on the cheap. What's nice about the way they did this was they just said, look, for every project we do, we'll have a postcard. Postcards are cheap. So we'll have a mechanism that people can pass on. It's enough of a thing that it has some value. When people send me newsletters, I mostly ditch them. They email me stuff and I go, oh yeah, right, fine. And I don't think about who else would benefit from this. You send me a thing, you send me a postcard, you give me a business card, and I'm much more likely to go, well, A, I can't just chuck it out and waste paper, but who else needs this? So thinking of communications approaches that encourage bringing more people into it, I think helps. And it's got a sort of simple elegance, which again, from a startup and lean perspective, is no bad thing. This was a newspaper format, printed in black plus one bright colour, that was used to communicate a bunch of art organisations in the East End of London during the second Frieze Art Fair. And really what it was trying to do was to take all these rich collectors out of central London to the East End. These are people who wouldn't go to the East End usually. And because it was bright pink, it caught their attention. And these are difficult spaces to find. They didn't look like galleries. They were a shed, a garage, a scruffy place, and you just looked at it and go, I don't think I should be going in there. So by photographing it and sticking the address on it, you could quite literally go, oh yeah, that's where I'm supposed to be, knock on door. The effect on the sales for this crowd was enormous. They distributed it at the main art fair, and they had hordes of collectors going, oh, I think I might explore that. So they're capitalising on the curiosity, and they're using the visual brightness of it to attract an audience that will be interested if they could but get them to change their behaviour. So again, it's the simplicity that's working in here. And if you hadn't noticed by this point, I just quite like paper products. And these are elegant invitations. They're invitations that go, I think I want to know more about that. That one down the bottom, you couldn't get the details until you unwrapped it. They're all slightly maverick. They're all doing something slightly different, and they're standing out from the crowd. And the reason they work is that each one of these communicates one little piece of the experience. So for me, the best marketing is not the stuff that just tells you something, but it gives you enough of an experience of the product to engage you further. It's got to feel like a bit of the real thing. If it's just a piece of communication like every other, it won't stand out enough. So think about how you translate that set of values, that set of motivations, that set of that language that you're developing into some things, each of which acts as a reminder of the main product. Which is why, by the way, I personally loathe a pen with a brand name on it, a mouse mat, a key ring, because on the whole they say nothing about the product. They're just stuff, right? So what I'm saying here is use the same creativity to apply to your marketing as you would do to your product development, and it will take that authenticity through the experience. Enough about that. Oh, that's just nice paper in a beautiful box. Well, it's more than that, but it'll be enough for now. Next dumb question. What's the point of sales? Why do you make sales? And the answer is all sorts of reasons. Yes, absolutely, it might be about the organic growth of the company so that you can fund stuff internally and you don't need to take investment and you can grow, blah, 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 which gives you the financial sustainability, preferably a profit. Alternatively, it could be proof of concept, that minimum viable product, in which case it doesn't need to make a profit, in which case it doesn't need to fuel growth on its own. It just needs to do enough. It needs to get enough traction. So understanding the point of sales for the given stage in the business, and not just, the reason I'm so sort of reductivist about this stuff is that if you're new to marketing or indeed sales, is that you tend to go, aha, marketing, I'll have one of those, and you don't change it enough for it to work for you. And what I'm saying here is customize. Customize your marketing approaches, customize your marketing communications, customize this stuff so it talks about your version. And that's what will deliver you that unique voice. That's enough of that. This really is an egg-sucking lesson, but I'm going to cover it anyway. You need a set of goals, which need to be that classic set of SMART stuff. I don't think I need to go through that in any detail, except you think I do? Oh, okay. I'm getting a nod.
No, I just realised I haven't done 2 or 3 of those.
Oh, okay. So, whether it's MBAs, marketing theory, etc., they will all say, have a set of SMART goals which are clearly defined. I like numbers in my goals personally. I don't care what kind of numbers. They could be money, they could be users, they could be units sold. Don't care, just have some. Because numbers you can measure. You can measure all the soft stuff too, but I like to have a bit of both. So a bit of quant and a bit of qual is a good thing in here. Again, if what you say is, by 2032, I will have done X, you're distancing yourself from success. I want success to be now, even if it's just a bit. So making those goals things that you can do this year makes it so much more real, so much more measurable, and you can see your progress. These goals need to be relevant to you and to the customer. That's 2 sets. And they need to be things that you can afford to do. If we're back to the if only I had a £500,000 advertising budget, not wildly useful. So let's have the stuff you can afford today and that works with a set of goals you can do this year, because that builds the progress. I do 2 versions of this. By the way, I tend to do this in a long sort of timeline that looks a bit like a measuring tape. And I've got at least 2 versions of it, preferably 3. The shortest term is the next 3 months and is really detailed. The next set is that 12 months, and it should be pretty detailed, and it absolutely has got to have numbers and progress in it. And I would say have a 3-year version, because what that forces you to do is guess at year 3. And year 3's version will be a bit scant. That's fine. I just want you to get into the habit of doing it. Have some idea of where you want to be in 3 years' time. It doesn't have to be lots, just some. And some is fine, because again, the message here is better to guesstimate than not to set any kind of goal at all. So you will almost certainly not be accurate in your year 3 projections. Nobody ever is. That's fine. Just make them anyway. And in case this ever needs to be said, you know, customers matter, because if you ain't got customers and there's no market, then this is just wishful thinking. Which leads me on to, there may be a gap in the market, but is there a market in the gap? We often think, and it comes back to the question raised by the gentleman at the back, we get myopic about, we really want to do this thing. The trouble is, if you've focused it down to a market that's only that big, the chances of you sustaining it and achieving your definition of success are probably fairly scant. So, let's get real about this. Markets don't always appear. And if you're doing something new, by the way, it almost certainly takes longer than you think it will. I've got one set of activities that I've been pursuing since 2007, doggedly, I might say. My area of interest in this case is benchmarking for small businesses and the desire for business data, because I think we'd run better businesses if we had it. Small businesses don't necessarily agree with me on this point. So I have been pursuing this for a while. The good news is I've been changing my area of interest in it so that we can do something. But, you know, let's be blunt, where I thought there was going to be a market in 2007, it has not happened. So you've got to learn to stop stuff as well. And you've got to look at those markets and say, actually, really not there yet. Really, I was too far ahead, or whatever else it is. So being willing to admit that you're wrong in here is kind of useful. And saying no to stuff and stopping things is also really useful. The other version of that is that you can't sell just to innovators, I would argue. Very rarely is that enough. So a little bit of innovation and then it all disappears, also not very useful. So we're looking for bigger markets, which is why my point about think big is important. Because it forces you to go looking for a big market, even if you only take a tiny percentage of it. Things your mother never told you about markets. Where's the power? Is the power with the customer or the supplier?
Today, the suppliers.
Uh-huh. Certainly in some markets. Are you getting squeezed by the big suppliers? Is that going to change your profitability? Think about it in advance, because if you can't get the decent profit margins because your supplier keeps whacking the price up, it's going to matter. What are the standard profit margins in your market? Knowing what the average is and working on that, rather than saying best in class achieves, and of course I will be best in class, helps you to be realistic about that stuff. Who owns the IP and how much power do they have? Are the customers knowledgeable or naive, and how does it change their buying patterns? I'm now going to speed up. And the devil is in the service. So making sure that you've sorted out the intangibility of the service and that people can see it. So making stuff tangible where you can and not having it sort of hover in the ether. Service is often difficult to separate from the service provider, so the people who provide it are vital. And particularly as you grow, if you're going into licensing and franchising, that heterogeneity can bite you in the bum. If you've got the wrong people doing it, it'll feel completely different in Saudi than it does here. And of course, services can't be stored. So again, we've got to think about that supply chain in somewhat different ways. I'm not going to have time to tell you about the classic Boston Matrix, except to say go look for it. It doesn't usually have pictures, nor do I really have time for this. So I'm going to finish here by saying, map out your strategy. If you're a visual person, do it visually. If you're like words, write it. Do it in a format that suits the way you think. Highlight where the areas of work are, that, in particular those you can't afford yet, but plan them into the years ahead. Action lists, I think, always good. Otherwise, all you have is a pretty picture and you don't do stuff about it. And these are all fairly old school. There's so many gazillion business books. They come and go like nothing else. These are the ones that, for me, have stood the test of time. I think that'll do. Thank you very much.